Hey peoples, I wanted to do a bit of a progress report on how my live performance is coming together. So for my live performance, which I'm doing next weekend, so in 7 days from now, so it's going to be on Saturday. Set times should be up shortly. But I just kind of wanted to give a rundown of what I'm using for my live performance. So one of the biggest aspects of my live performance is using Max for Live. And probably the main feature behind my live performance is that it's all completely improvised, and I'm basically setting some kind of rules, but all of the music is going to be dictated by whatever is generated by Max. So I'm just really trying to stop things from turning into chaos and going with the flow. So it should be a lot of fun for myself and hopefully the viewers as well. Maybe watching me crashing and burning, who knows? We'll see what happens. I will be using Ableton Live 11 beta during my live performance, which is actually quite stable, so fingers crossed that nothing goes wrong there, and nothing goes wrong with my max patching. But this is a sequencer, basically 4 sections that are identical. Basically, the concept behind it is that I can randomly generate a set of notes by clicking this button here, Notes. And that's basically going to generate 16 random numbers. So those 16 random numbers go into this table, in which I can then shift these numbers around. So I can shift them up and down or move them around like this, so that they, the sequence starts with a different note. So this is basically a sequence of 16 notes that it'll step through. And the notes that are actually spat out of each sequencer can vary quite a bit with this little bit of logic that I implemented. So I have this initial sequence, which is the 16 notes, which will play, which are being clocked by 16th notes. So it's a 1-bar sequence. But then as I introduce a second kind of sequence and some logic, I can create variations on that outcome. So rather than just the 16 notes as it appears in this table, I can add the 16 notes with another sequencer, which uses the same notes, but either playing 1 bar at a time. So it'll play that note for 1 bar, then that note for 1 bar, then that note for 1 bar, then that note for 1 bar, or each beat. So it'll be basically the sequence, a new note is created every beat. So X in this case is just a 16th note sequence, and I can mix it with either a quarter note sequence or a 1 bar sequence. And how this second sequence interacts with the first one generates a different kind of variation of that sequence. So I've got X plus Y, X times Y, X minus Y, X divided by Y, the remainder of the division or modulo, and equal to, and then just Y. So they're kind of laid out in a way that X is going to be is going to just simply repeat the 16th pattern. This will create a bit more variation and make the pattern a bit longer. And also by choosing the 1 bar for the second sequence will make it longer. But then as I get down to here, because of the logic that it uses or the arithmetic of combining these two sequences, the notes actually get closer together and a little bit simpler. So in X, they're moving around quite a bit, and then some of these they're moving around quite a bit. And I'll give you an audio example of some of this in a moment. But then as it gets towards the bottom, the things get a bit simpler. So that gives me some kind of control over the musicality that's being generated from each sequencer. And basically, each of these 4 sequences uses the same set of notes to begin with, but then using the logic and these kind of note rotate buttons, I can make them all a little bit different. So the idea is that because they're using the same original collection of notes, that they are inherently linked in some way. So it kind of works, and this is something that I'm going to develop further and further, much further than just this performance. Really, I would like to create a kind of max patch that is an interactive standalone application that you can use to generate music and basically interact with an album that I've made using Max. That's further down the line. That's something to think about. But yeah, this is kind of steps towards that, I guess. Me playing around with my Max patches live. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, moving on in this sequencer. So that's the note section. And I've basically got the length of the note and the velocity of the notes, again, being generated randomly. So there might be better ways to generate some of this data. So rather than pure random, maybe some sort of weighting. And that's something I'll get into later. But for the time being, the random is serving its purpose. And I might simplify these controls a little bit more because I tend not to use them too much. So see what happens there. But I can randomly generate a new set of velocities or lengths for any of these single sequences. So the next part of the sequencer is the gate generation, or the triggers used to trigger each note. So I originally started with just probability, which basically will generate 16 random numbers, and then whether or not they're above or below a certain threshold will dictate whether it's an on or off. So it's kind of randomly generated, and then I can set the probability that it will be, above 50 with this dial here. So turning it up, it's more likely to have more notes. Turning it down, it's more likely to have less notes. I can also rotate these. So all of this stuff is I'm working with lists in Max, which allows me to kind of process them in all sorts of different ways. So it's a really good way to learn about lists, actually. So the second way that I've just added to this sequencer is Euclidean, and I pretty much stole this from the rotating rhythm device that comes in Max, and I might just bring it up just so that you can see. Yeah, rotating rhythm generator. So I basically dug into this patch and stole a little bit from it and just adapted it to my use case. So I didn't need a lot of the functions and kind of stripped it down to just the basic elements and then built it back out to fit into my little sequencer. And basically this is just the amount of steps in a 16th step Euclidean sequence. So it's evenly distributing those gates. So note ons are the higher value throughout that 16th note sequence. And that tends to be a lot more musical than probability and a little bit more reliable. So I never really know what probability is going to spit out. And it can be really good, but sometimes you just need a solid groove or something to be a little bit more connected to the rhythm than completely random gates. So Euclidean really works well there. And I may even get rid of the probability, but we'll see. So this is a constant work in progress. Even as I'm practicing for this live performance, which I haven't even got to yet, I'm still building out the kind of this big instrument that I'm kind of creating using Max and a few other bits and pieces. But yeah, as I kind of play with this, it's going to change quite a bit. So what I use in the final live performance may be quite different to this, or it might be quite similar, who knows. Another thing I've recently added is just the ability to reverse the notes in the sequence. And I thought maybe this might be useful for creating some sort of counterpoint between two melodies and give some interesting interactions there. So maybe we'll have a play with that and see how that sounds. But yeah, this is my kind of improvisational sequencer. So 4 sequences that can be sent to any track in Ableton. Could even be sent outside to hardware, but I'm just using Ableton for all my synths and then using a Roland TR-8S for a bit more hands-on tactile control for all the drums, and using iPads to visualize and control any of the parameters inside Ableton and Max. So this is actually using Mira, which is an object package that you can add to Max. And what Mira allows you to do is basically set a window that can be viewed using an iPad. So you can download the Mira app on your iPad, or you can use Mira through a web browser. And some people say that web browsers may be a little bit more efficient or more stable if you're on the same network. Obviously, you always have to be on the same network. But I'm just using USB to my iPad through the app, and that's been great. So this is actually viewed on an iPad, and I can control any of this stuff via my iPad. So that's pretty cool. My own little custom interface for all my note and rhythm generation for all my synths. So that's a big part of this live performance that I'll be doing. I've also added some extra chants, so basically note probability for each of the 4 sequences. Yeah, there's kind of bits taken from different Max for Live devices that I've been working on, and different patches that are kind of coming together into this one thing. So it's been cool to pull some different projects into one project. So for a track to receive some of that information, I've just made a simple Max for Live device, which is just has a selector, and I can select which sequencer is coming into this particular track. As I mentioned, I am using Ableton Live 11 beta for the live performance. That way I can use these random buttons on the racks to randomly generate new sounds. So as well as randomly generating the note and rhythm data, I'm also randomly generating the sounds to some degree. So obviously they're going to be set within areas that still sound somewhat good, and I am still going to have to cue stuff in my headphones to just make sure it doesn't sound like a total mess before I bring it in. But yeah, it just adds a little bit more excitement for me, I guess, and hopefully something a little bit interesting for you guys as well. So this is my live set that I'm currently working on, and it's actually, I've had to change a few inputs and outputs so that I can actually play this to you guys, because yeah, I do have some funky routings using my Roland TRA-S as the audio interface, and then routing Ableton out of the TRA-S, so using that as my audio interface back into the TRA-S, so that way I can apply the reverbs, master compressor, and the scatter effects on the Roland TRA-S. So it really is my kind of main hub for this performance. So it's been a bit of an effort to try and find the best way of doing things with that, and it is a little bit, unorthodox, I guess, but it's proving to be pretty good, and I've just finished setting up my drum kit on the Roland TRS, and I'm quite happy with it. You'll see how that sounds maybe in some other videos, but due to the funky routing, I couldn't actually record that in to this video. So instead, I've just got a standard 808, and just a little sneak peek of something that is coming up is this Max for Live device that I've been working on, which I'm super stoked about. It's just a compressor, and I've kind of avoided compressors in Max for a long time. I've always wanted to make a good one that is kind of interesting and unique, and I think I've managed to reach that point now that I can actually do that. So this compressor has surprised me in how it sounds, and you'll definitely hear more about that. But basically, it's very loosely based on the original unit that the Soundtoys Devil Lock emulates. Yeah, it's basically a lot of kind of auto compression type stuff. It's really pumpy. There's a bit of distortion in there. The actual compression that it does is quite transparent, but on the output, I've programmed a little bit of Clipper in Gen, and I'll basically make all of it work in Gen so that the compressor is actually doing its job a little bit better than just running in Max MSP. It'll be a little bit more CPU efficient as well. But yeah, very cool drum limiter compressor that you'll hear more about in the future. So let's actually have a listen to what this sequencer is doing. So just this first track, if I unmute that, I've got sequence 1 selected, and this is a little 303 emulation that I've made just using Ableton's analog. And if we bring up the sequencer now, we can have a look at what's going on here, because it sounds really whack at the moment. Sweet. So keep that playing, and I might just bring this down a little bit. Cool. So I can change this to X, and I'll just turn up the amount of steps. Cool. So now that's just running through that 16th note sequence. And I've got chance for the output of the whole sequencer, or I can reduce the amount of steps in the sequence. I can generate new velocities, which isn't going to have a huge effect on this particular synth. Different note lengths, so it kind of will change the slides and gate patterns. Reverse the notes. So even just for a performance aspect, I think those reverse notes sound pretty cool. And then if I join sequences using this logic, the sequence gets a lot longer. Sounds quite good. So these are just random numbers ranging between, I think, 0 and 23, I think. So I've basically given myself 2 octaves, but they are all running through a kind of scale effect. So all of the notes that are spat out of each of the sequences are only generating MIDI notes that are inside the scale that I set here, which is currently G minor. So I can change this to F minor. But I'm sticking to G just because it works well with kick drums and basses on a big system. So that's pretty cool. Let's have a listen to how that sounds alongside some other stuff. So I might just switch back to X for that. So I've got some other sounds here. So this one's running off sequence 2. And if I switch this to the probability gate generation, straight away I get a different rhythm. But that Euclidean really just helps tie stuff together using Euclidean sequences for everything. It just makes that a little bit more musical in a very random, probabilistic kind of environment that I've built for myself with this little sequencer or set of sequences. So really digging that addition. And you can see that I've used a logic there that generates quite simple notes. So it's pretty much very rarely changing note, because it's very rare that a note of the 2 sequences is going to be the same. And when it is, it'll generate a pitch slightly above, because it'll either be a 1 or 0. So this will be a little bit more musicality. Yeah, kind of keeping it single note there. But on this one, I can make this more musical. So let's bring in some other sounds. got another synth that's being triggered off sequence 2 as well. So kind of 2 tonal palettes there, I guess, that I can change between. These synth sounds are going to change quite a bit in the final live performance. They're kind of just using them as a template or a stepping stone for the time being. I kind of like those 2 sounds playing together. So I'll bring in another sound here. So some kind of bit of a 2-note chord being played here on this 3rd sequencer. So it all sounds relatively musical for being generated quite randomly. And again, I think that comes down to the Euclidean rhythm kind of pulling things together. And I can bring in this pad as well. So with this pad, it's basically wavetable. And I've got a MIDI effect rack here, which is using my chords device to turn a single note sequence into a set of chords for the wavetable. So just turn on auto mode. So my job in the live performance will really be to bring all these sounds in and out in interesting ways and generate new sequences every 5 minutes, let's say, and just kind of build new compositions on the fly based on the sequences that are randomly generated by this sequencer that I've built. So from here, if I hit notes, you'll hear all of the notes change, and hopefully it should sound like another kind of track. So definitely sounds different. Let's do it again. Alright, maybe not heaps of variation. Octaves are going to change things quite a bit there. Playing things in different octaves. Maybe let's mute this. And I'll just, for demonstration purposes, switch this to probability gate generation instead of Euclid, so you can hear that. So, very different feel. And I can click this little groove button and it'll generate different groove for everything. So that's kind of cool. Nice, that's kind of different vibe happening there with the notes and the rhythm. So even though we're keeping the same notes, just generating a new rhythm, different notes are being played because they're either being missed or included in the particular sequence based on the groove. And if I hit notes, so that's a cool little vibe happening there with some of the notes. So there's really a lot to explore, and basically I'm going to be exploring this live and hopefully making some sense of it and enjoying the outcome and hopefully you guys will too. If you want to find out more about my Max for Live devices, head to gumroad.com/RobertKGM. I'll leave a link in the description. And yeah, I'll leave a bit more information about this live performance in the description as well. And you'll see a bit more about this particular sequencer as I build it out. I'll do more videos and kind of just explore this whole generative thing a little bit more, hopefully with a bit of input from everyone. So yeah, thanks for watching and see you soon.